Okay, welcome back. This is part two of my conversation with Ted Heiman. Ted's the CISO guru, if you want to look him up online, and a good friend of mine. We've got lots to share with you today, but I think one of the big challenges we were discussing again over one of our cups of tea was CISOs don't know it all, and they have such a breadth of knowledge to get their heads around. Ted, you see this all the time. Tell me what you see.
Yeah, so being a CISO it's a tough job, and the security industry is a very complex industry. Tremendous number of different technologies and areas that you need to be aware of, and CISOs are kind of expected to just know everything. So, everybody expects a CISO to be an expert in security, and not only an expert in security, but an expert in every aspect of security. And so, which is unreasonable, almost a completely unreasonable request, because first of all, nobody can know it all. And second of all, there are so many areas of focus in the security industry that to expect them to understand all of them, at any level of depth is unreasonable. And so what we find is, in the industry, we find that people are very strong in specific areas. Like that's where they've been exposed to, and these are the areas where they're competent. And so you can talk about things like, somebody that knows authentication, privileged access management, identity and access management, and that's kind of where they're an expert, right?
Yep.
And
yep.
you can have a whole other different area that's firewalls, configuration management, network segmentation, more on the IT side. That could be another big chunk. And then on the other side, you've got another area where you start talking about like encryption and hardware security modules and public key infrastructure, and so there's all these different areas of expertise, and to expect a CISO to know it all is unreasonable, but that's what we expect. And so one of the reasons I do what I do is I want to be that guy that CISOs can turn to when they've been told, we need you to deploy X, Y, and Z, and they're like, that's not an area where I have deep understanding or exposure. Let me find somebody who's the subject matter expert to walk me through this. And so I think that CISOs, they don't ever want to say no, or I don't understand that, or I don't know about that, because from the world's perspective, they're supposed to be the experts.
Well, so then we can add a good slice, and then I've got a specific question for you, but a good slice of compliance, governance, the politician required in the CISO to interface with the board. It's just vast, isn't it? The amount that they have to aggregate. And then to the other part of our conversation, the point solutions and, show me what we've got here. Is it an impossible task, Ted?
It's not an impossible task, but it is a Herculean task. And without the right people in place, the right policies in place, the right practices in place, it can become extremely overwhelming. And I think that's unfortunately why, the life expectancy of an average CISO is between 2 and 3 years, because it's a super demanding job. And I mean, if you think about it, a CISO comes in, they spend their first 6 months to a year learning everything that they need to know about, this new company that they've just joined, their systems, their politics, their culture, their infrastructure, what technology they've got deployed, and why, what systems they built in-house that are proprietary versus what systems maybe they're buying as a SaaS, a software as a service type solution. So there's a lot to get your arm around when you first enter the enterprise, just to get what I would call the state of the state, to have that firm understanding. And then once you're there, then you've got to say, okay, where are my gaps? Where are my red flags? Where am I not protected the way that I want to be protected? And so then the next step is they have to build a roadmap that says we need to do these 10 things in the next year to improve our attack surface and make our network more difficult to breach. And so in that next year, they basically spend implementing that roadmap and trying to get it done. And in their third year, just when they're starting to really make progress, everybody on their teams knows who they are, what's expected of them. The CISO is finally humming along and everything's going fine. And then there's a breach. And unfortunately, the way that it works today is when there's a security breach, the board just says, okay, we're going to fire the CISO. And then they're going to say, everything's good. We got rid of the guy who was responsible for security and missed this thing. We're bringing in a new guy. You have nothing to worry about. The brand is fine. Everything's perfect. And so, unfortunately, the CISO ends up getting thrown under the bus, and then they start over again with a new company and rinse and repeat. And so, it's one of the most difficult jobs that I can think of. And having 25 years in security, it's probably not a job that I would want to take, because it is really, really hard, and especially if you don't have the board behind you and have that relationship and be able to have those discussions.
So that's very interesting. You mentioned that, and the CISO, he or she has all this tacit knowledge that's built up in those first couple of years, as you say, and then a breach happens. The organization is complex. It might have mergers, acquisitions, all those different levels of hygiene, if you like, from historical perspectives, tech debt. How on earth can they do their best? Why are they the person that's the scapegoat? And also, or may not be, of course, but they're also having to spend so much time educating the board on the basic 101s of the risk of their own business. So there's this tacit knowledge. I mean, a CISO's value is very high if you think about it from that. The experience base, the knowledge, the way in which they know how to implement and get stuff done within organizations and quickly navigate the politics. But give me your thought on this as well. CISOs need teams, and teams are extremely hard to hire, have the right knowledge, retain, skills drain. How does CISOs, in your mind, cope with that challenge? Because it's yet another dimension, Ted, isn't it, into running their org? How do they deal with the people side?
It is. A CISO is only as good as the team he has around him. He's a single individual. He can't do it all on his own. He needs to have a team that's working together in concert to achieve the goals that you laid out in the roadmap that we talked about earlier, right? So having that team is critical, and having a team that has the knowledge and experience that you don't need to hold their hand every time that you give them a task is really important. And so building this team, creating camaraderie, and getting everybody to work together is really, really super important from the perspective of having that team that are all working together with one goal, which is to secure the enterprise. And the big challenge is that, one, there's a big shortage of cybersecurity resources as far as people available who have the kind of knowledge that CISOs need to have them on their team.
Yeah.
There's no colleges out there teaching cybersecurity. I won't say there's no, but there are a few, and they've started fairly recently. Making that an option to get educated on cybersecurity. But really, most people come up through the ranks. They come up through IT. They start in IT, and then somewhere along the way they get involved in a security project, and then the CISO sees that they're really good at what they do and grabs them and says, I want you on my team. And so you see a lot of that where they grow organically, but also CISOs are limited by budget, so they can only have so many people on their team, right? They've got to make it all work within a budget that's been established. So so manpower and resources are really critical, and that's why it's really important that the people on your team have multiple areas of expertise. Remember, we talked about being siloed into one. The more areas of expertise somebody has, the more valuable they are to the team, because there's more tasks that you can give that individual because they have that broader understanding.
But how do we deal with, so let's look at that breadth of skill then. So CISO and then CISO team. CISO team needs a breadth of skill, but if I just say 2 or 3 key areas, we've got applications, what's its own minefield and an entire career of understanding that. Then we've got, let's say, pipeline and development, and then we've got cloud at the other end, which is just totally different in mindset. How do we encourage, develop our people to have such breadth? How do we polarize them? Do we specialize them within clusters of skills, Ted, from your perspective? How does the CISO configure their chess pieces around the board to give the overlap? And is this why we're going back to point solutions to get us more coverage that bridges those gaps? What do you think?
Yeah, so there's 2 pieces to that. One, CISOs have to understand and put a priority on training. And it's hard because that pulls somebody out of the field where they're not acting as part of the team because they're focused on training. But it's critical because security is not a static thing. Security is constantly moving, it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving. And if your people aren't educated to understand that evolution, then they're not going to be as valuable to you. And so CISOs have to bake in to everybody on their team time to get educated, whether it's going to a seminar, whether it's taking a class from ISACA or ISC squared. It's like just continued educational development, and that has to just be built into the organization, because otherwise the technology passes you by. And so, as you said, things have gotten really complicated, right? It started with just a pretty straightforward concept, which everything's on-prem, and so we have control of everything. It's in our environment, we can secure it, we can operate it, and it's all good. But then we got the cloud, and that introduced new and interesting security challenges that we had never faced before. And how are we going to secure the interface between that cloud offering and the enterprise, as far as that? And then what's even become more complex is then these hybrid cloud environments where part of it's on-prem and part of it's in the cloud, and that whole chain needs to be secured. And so, yes, it's gotten much more difficult these days to do all this because there's so many moving parts. And the other thing is that we talked about networks being organic and whatnot. There was a day you could define your perimeter. Nowadays, most CISOs for an enterprise would have a very difficult time defining their perimeter so that like we used to be able to do early on, because there's so many ingress and egress points on the network you've got so many connections to the network. You've got business partners, you've got vendors, you've got suppliers, you've got other divisions, and they all need access to that data. And so you're opening up holes in your firewall, and you're doing these things to have access to these organizations that are critical to your success as an enterprise. But it also creates opportunities for breaches, because you've opened up all these holes in your network. And so, that's something that is from a complexity perspective, it gets more and more difficult. And then running the applications as well, and are the applications going to run in the cloud, or are they going to run on-prem, and you have to make those considerations too.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, a multidisciplined, multifaceted, multi-skilled politician meets technologist meets budgeteer, if that's a word, finance, politics, threat, everything. It's a real mix, isn't it? So we need to pin down the top things that are in your mind about how we start tackling this stuff. And it's obviously not an exhaustive list, but I know we've spoken about this before. Share with me, Ted, your sort of top 4 or 5 things that you see really drive impact and move the needle and start solving some of these problems inherently for us.
There are things, there are some basic things that you can do and steps that you can take to try and minimize your attack surface and make it, to try and make it as small as possible, right? To eliminate as many ways, crevices for people to get in. And so I think one thing that's really been interesting and that CISOs have had to deal with is compliance, right? So compliance drives a lot of the technology that they deploy, because when you look at legislation like HIPAA or GDPR or the California Privacy Act, or whatever those compliance requirements are, you have to put in place controls to address those concerns. And so compliance has is in many ways forcing people to kind of stay up to date, and more compliance requirements come up every day. We're going to see new compliance requirements come in from our federal government, but also we're seeing governments around the world now passing privacy legislation and whatnot. So compliance for the enterprise becomes very important and drives a lot of what the security team does, because if there's a breach and they find out that they weren't compliant, the fines can be 7 figures. They're significant. And so compliance, it becomes a critical component of what a CISO needs to keep track of, because that's where you can get bit if you're not really paying attention.
This is order number one. Order number one: get your compliance and requirements in house and organize. So, and then within that, Ted, in the last sort of 2 or 3 minutes, tell me about your top 4 or 5 things that then move the needle, point solution wise or risk wise.
So I think the number one thing we can do is a very simple thing, but for some reason there seems to be tremendous resistance around it. But if we could just eliminate static passwords, it would save everybody in the security industry a lot of time and money. And so, and I don't think there's a good excuse for not implementing a multi-factor authentication solution that gives you a little bit more security around access to your data and your information. And really all that means is combining something you have with something that you know to gain access to the network. And the something that it's just like a system that's worked for years. The banks use it. You have your ATM card and you have a PIN, something you have and something you know. And ATMs have been pretty secure for many years. And so it's just taking that concept and taking it to the enterprise and saying, okay, we need to make sure that that only people who should have access are gaining access to these systems. And therefore, looking at multi-factor authentication is really, really critical. And there's so many ways to do it now. You can do it leveraging your phone, which most of us have experienced at one time or another, being verified by your bank or somebody by them sending a message to your phone. You can use like Yubico keys. You can use USB tokens. USB tokens. You can use RSA. There are just so many different options around improving and strengthening the level of authentication that's required to to secure the enterprise. And so we definitely want to get rid of static passwords and look at multi-factor authentication, because I think when you look at the journey of zero trust, the start of the journey is there. Since we don't know what our perimeter is, identity is our new perimeter. And and if identity is our new perimeter, then how do we authenticate these identities in such a way that we know that they should have access to the data? And that's what zero trust is all about, which is saying, no, we don't care who you are, whether you're internal to the network or external to the network. We're going to require the same level of authentication for you to gain access to this information. And that's what zero trust is really. The true goal and what's behind zero trust is this idea of basically trust nobody. That leads into this idea of least privileged access, where you only give access to somebody who needs it, that you're actually paying attention to who needs access to what resources. And so that's the next piece. And then the other piece that goes along with this is privileged access management, right? So if you're going to roll out authentication, you start with your privileged access people, because they're the guys that have the keys to the kingdom. Those guys can get into anything, can do anything, read any email they want, look at annual reports. I mean, they have access to everything. So by implementing a privileged access management system, you know what they're accessing and when and how, and it gives you much more control over that data. And then I think now with the complexity of the attacks that we're seeing out there, which have become dramatically more complex, is companies need a really good anomaly detection system. Because if you know what normal looks like on your network, if you can define normal, this is normal traffic on my network, then it's pretty easy to look for traffic that's not quote unquote normal. And that's what anomaly detection is all about, is having a solution that's crawling your network, looking for anything that's out of place, that doesn't make sense, code that's being executed that's growing and expanding through your network, these kinds of things. So anomaly detection is critical. And then it's taking all of this with a defense in depth perspective, and then leveraging all of these ideas and applying them to the concept of zero trust, which is getting all these things working together, so that you truly are meeting that requirement that no matter who it is, they have to have the same access to gain access to that data.
I got you, and to use your own words, working together in concert. Ted, I love the way in which you articulate your ideas and your thoughts, and it has been so interesting to speak to you, your morning today. I think we need to leave it there. We will definitely need to revisit with more of this. But for the moment, Ted Heiman, CISO Guru, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.